Welcome to the Northwest Eco Building Guild 2020 Slam and Summit. I'm your host, Kathy Zime. This session is Unvented Attics Without Foam with Martha Rose. We're starting each session this year with an acknowledgement that we are on the land of the first peoples of this region. And so I'm in Seattle. I am on the land of the Duwamish tribe. If you look at this slide, you can see in the lower right-hand corner a link that you can copy paste to find the original inhabitants of the land where you reside. And the reason we're doing this is we want to honor with gratitude not only the land itself, but the tribal people who've been faithful stewards of the land, the water, and the ancient history of life. Second, the Northwest Eco Building Guild, we're all here because we have a passion for green building, and the Northwest Eco Building Guild's unofficial motto of pushing the envelope. And that doesn't just mean the physical envelope of the building. One of the most impactful envelopes we can push is about people. So it's about equity, social justice, and climate justice. So we invite you to keep that in mind as you attend these various sessions. This is a really important aspect of sustainability that we need to be aware of as we work to build a brighter future. These are our sponsors who are making this whole gathering possible. This is Dunn Lumber, Farrows Creative LLC, and King County Green Tools, and we are so grateful. These are our supporting sponsors. You can see a lot of companies you recognize and maybe some new ones. And these are the folks that are helping make this all possible for us. And these final contributing sponsors, everyone is helping in whatever way they can to make this possible, and we really appreciate it. Finally, this is the platform that we're using, and I just want to point out a few things. In the upper left-hand corner, the purple circle around 3 bars, you can click on that to read help topics if you're having trouble with Remo. If you're like, I can't read stuff, you go to the lower left bar, and that's where you can chat with Remo tech support. If you don't want to chat with a tech support stranger, go over to the chat window on the right-hand side, and you can talk to Grace Wong, and she'll try to help you with any problems. We also want to ask you, if you're have any questions during Martha's talk, please type them into the Q&A tab, and we will answer them at the end of the session. And finally, I would like to introduce our speaker, Martha Rose. Let me just get back here. Okay, so most of you know Martha Rose, but for those of you who don't, she is an in-city builder developer who's been working in our region since 1996. She specializes in not only high performance homes, but healthy homes and mixed use buildings. And so what that means is she's working on buildings that produce as much energy as they consume, incorporate heat recovery ventilation, and have green stormwater infrastructure on the sites. And she's not only been experimenting with different ways to improve the performance of the buildings in a technical sense, but also to make them healthier and have a lower operating cost. So she's also focusing on the people side of things. And with that, please welcome Martha Rose. Please come to the stage.
There we go. So I'm going to put my screen on, see how many more difficulties we can have. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. As she said, this is my topic, and these are the learning objectives for AIA. You guys can read them yourself, but hopefully at the end of the day, you'll have a few new tricks up your sleeve. So today's talk, I'm going to go a little bit into my background in that it's a little bit relevant to this talk, and it's what led me to some of my preferences in today's, and how I build and how I mitigate the effects of constructing with non-vented attics. The techniques may not be meant for you, or they might grant you new freedom, hopefully the latter. My arguments in favor of no foam come with an expectation that the house system, and there's a very specific set of requirements that have to be adhered to. So I'm hoping that at the end we'll have some really good conversation, because I know that this topic can elicit some strong reactions. I debated whether I would even share with the Guild because of that aspect, including the opening oneself up to liability by not following what the code says. I mean, just a couple of days ago, I was talking to a Seattle builder who was shocked that I would make a decision not to follow the code. And when I explained why, I felt like it was more of a liability to put the foam there. He said, yeah, but it won't fail while you're still alive. And I'm like, no, that's not good enough. I don't want it to fail in 50 or 100 years. So I understand that anytime you walk a different pathway, you are taking a little bit of a risk, except that a builder that I worked for many moons ago said it's not a risk if you analyze it carefully and you use your intelligence and your experience and everything else. So at any rate, the Guild is for sharing ideas, so that's what we're doing today. And we are all experimenters. Many of us have great ideas and different ways to build, and we try them out on ourselves first, and then we share them with others, and that's what I'm doing. So a few highlights of my history in the industry and what led me to where I am today. Where I am sitting, the project I just finished, we have a -13 HERS score, which was awesome. So in my first year of construction, I learned that wood must breathe. And what that means is that it simply can dry out if it gets wet. It's not inhaling and exhaling like we are so much as just being able to dry out. And when that can happen, it'll last for a very long time. So after 10 years of pounding nails, I had the fortune of being employed by the City of Seattle Building Department. And that job put me on 10 to 15 sites a day, doing every conceivable type of inspection. And I got to witness both good and bad building practices and good and bad code changes, and how the bad methods manifested in some sort of a failure, delaminating plywood or other things. So that was an invaluable experience that really influenced my practices today. And most importantly, I learned that building and energy codes don't always get it right. So here's an example. Back in the early 80s, the energy code mandated that the builder would staple visqueen to the inside of the 2x6 studs and to the underside of the trusses before the drywall went on. And every Friday, the building inspectors would meet around a conference table. We'd discuss things that would happen in the field. And 9 out of 10 of us thought that the visqueen was a really bad idea. And we would hopefully convince the other person that was inspecting the same. But we would instruct our builders not to put the visqueen up on the walls. And if we showed up on the job site for an installation inspection and there was visqueen, we asked them to take their utility knives and slash it so that any moisture that might have been in those walls could get out. We all have seen the mold. We all know what it looks like when the trap moisture can't get out or can't properly dry out. And these weakest links happen where the roof and wall intersect and the two walls come together and where the floors and walls meet. And a few years after that provision was in the code, it was taken out and replaced with a requirement for PVA primer to be the not quite so closed. It let some moisture through. So to be clear, there are other factors that cause mold like this, but clearly the visqueen was one of these factors. Now I'm lucky that I'm restless, because after 4 years, I left the city to build for other builders and developers as a self-employed freelance project manager. And those years were invaluable because I got to get inside their heads and learn to build the way they did. It lasted 10 years, and I worked for dozens of builders and developers. None of them wanted to go beyond code. They just wanted to follow the code, do what it said, and not question it and not seek other more advanced opportunities. They simply had the financial resources to be builders. Many of them had no knowledge of how to build or the codes or anything. And I believe that most of our building codes are kind of formulated for that common denominator of the person that's out there doing it, but doesn't really dig deep to understand all the whys. So during that time and beyond, literally for decades, I stayed connected to the Seattle Building Department by participating in monthly meetings with all of the department heads, and a handful of builders were there. Our objective was to find solutions to problems that were being encountered by all the builders out in the field, and these were sometimes building code related and sometimes land use related. Finally, by 1997, I was able to build my first spec home, and I never looked back. In 2003, when I learned about Built Green, I joined that program as a way to differentiate the way I built from the rest of those people that I had worked with all those years. And when the 4- and 5-star level rolled out, I went full on for all 5-star. So this little building was done in 2004, before the 5-star code or Built Green got laid out. And during the framing phase, I understood that there was a potential problem with wind-driven rain. If I was to vent this attic, which was the floor of a rooftop deck, I knew that wind-driven rain would get in there. So what I did is I asked the city of Seattle for a code exemption. And this was before non-vented attics were allowed. I proposed using open cell isonine. I proposed filling the entire cavity. And I had learned that if water gets in isonine, it has this, the properties are such that the water migrates vertically through the isonine, and it'll actually show up on the drywall, the ceiling of the drywall. So the request was taken to code committee. They approved it. Probably partly because they knew me, but also they knew I was going to live there, and they knew that I had given them sound arguments, including the research that I had done about the properties of isonine. So during the 4 years that I lived in this building, there were absolutely no issues at all with that, that methodology. And now whoever lives there, if that rooftop deck ever leaks, it'll manifest with the stains on the drywall, and they'll know that they've neglected their maintenance. Now there was an issue with the continuous ridge vent of the steep pitched roof, which was also complemented with soffit vents, and that manifested by the drywall tape separating up at the ridge that I had to repair. But there wasn't a code, there wasn't a mold issue. It was just that I could tell the wind-blown rain was coming in there. So actually, after this building, I never used ridge vents again because I didn't feel like they were a very good solution. So also, it was on this project that I got my first blower door test, thanks to Tom Balderson. And I don't remember the results, and I'm hoping that maybe Tom does, but they weren't very good. They were, I would consider them sort of bad by today's standards. But from that point on, that was my incentive to gain more knowledge and to figure out how to tighten up the envelope so I could get a good blower door test. I got my training from many of the places people in this room got their training. Trade shows, seminars, NHB and the International Builders Show, the Guild, all of these places. ACI, which is now Building Performance Association, U.S. Green Building Council's Green Build. So I took the Passive House classes, and all of these things led me to change my building practices. I quit using crawl spaces. I upped my wall assembly to use a sandwich of closed cell foam and added triple pane windows. I quit using sliding glass doors and windows, opting instead for casements, awnings, and picture windows. And that I have Passive House to put that one on my learning there. I got rid of most cantilevers and pop-outs because they're harder to seal. And I joined the Energy Star program, and I learned about the Building America program. And those engineers working with Building America, notably Mike Lubliner, they coached me and the other people I worked with about building science, and they monitored a home I lived in for 2 years. And that prompted me to make further changes. So each building block, each learning thing was a call to figure it out and get better at it. So then I took the Healthy Home classes at North Seattle Community College, or Seattle Central, excuse me, and I gave up natural gas. And then one of the presenters urged us to not use wafer board. I had already given it up and focused on the importance of using plywood. So all of these things in tandem are playing a role in what I do today. Okay, so why go with a non-vented attic? And you can read as well as I can. It really does solve a lot of problems. Now, I believe that the air infiltration was such a big deal, and I knew that going with the non-vented attic would be a game changer. It was. This is a picture from one of 6. I did 6 units that had foam sprayed up against the attic, and these are in a parallel truss that has between 18 to 24 inches, depending on what the engineer needed for the strength based on the span. After the foam was in, then we put 2 bats of fiberglass. But these air changes, after we went to this method, dropped down to 1 air change at 50 pascals. And we knew that the air leakage, because before that, the best I could get was between 2.5 and 3, which was a great improvement over Eva Rose building, but still wanted to get down to that magic 1. So when under test, we could feel the air gushing in from the attic through the door jambs on the top floor. And this is after we tried all these techniques that are recommended. I tried the gasket technique, where you take sill seal and put it where the wall meets the truss before the drywall goes in. I personally crawled around attics, and anywhere light came in, I personally sealed with foam and caulking, and these things didn't work. I gave up recessed cans like ages ago, and gave up central heating systems with ductwork ages ago, but still we had trouble getting below that 2.5 or almost 3 on our air changes. So I'm spending this much time talking about air sealing because I view that as probably the single most important thing behind keeping bulk water out. Anywhere your air can go, it's going to potentially bring moist air with it, which is going to drive this problem that created the requirement for foam in the first place. So so I wouldn't want to live in a home that had this foam. I started getting really uncomfortable with this idea. I started thinking about it. What are the repercussions of having this closed cell foam? You have a waterproof membrane on top that doesn't breathe, and now you're putting a waterproof barrier on the underside that doesn't breathe. And if that roof ever gets any kind of a leak in it, from any reason, like maybe you did a great job, and maybe you put a solar racking system, and maybe somebody didn't quite seal it right, and the water that gets in there isn't going to manifest. It's going to get trapped. It's going to cause a festering rot. And sometimes maybe it does find its way out, but it's probably not going to be where it came in. So I just started getting very uncomfortable with continuing down this path. So I've read and listened to discussions about how water migrates into the attic, and then it condenses on the roof sheathing and causes the problems. The biggest condensation occurs when it's freezing outside. And the problems are ice dams and deterioration of the sheathing. And maybe there's some other things too, but those are the main two. And I'm suggesting that if the environment inside the home is controlled in a way that moisture-laden air can't get in there, it's a non-issue. So that's where we're focusing, is keeping the humidity stable, and the building a home as a proper system is going to make this a non-issue. The number of days we have that kind of cold weather, maybe a couple weeks at best. I don't know. There might be a freak year, but we don't really have that much weather that gets into that cold temperature. So, and as long as the wood can dry out, like you keep it open to the living space, it'll be okay. So in 2016, I built a home for my sister-in-law, first project outside of Seattle after I moved. And I suggested to her that we do the non-vented attic without foam. And she agreed because she trusted me. And we took a lot of care on air sealing. And she did insist on a few things that I wouldn't do, like a couple sets of double doors, a kitchen fan that hooks up to the outdoors, a dryer that hooks up to the outdoors. But even still, even with all that, it worked out. The inspector didn't notice it. We didn't call it to his attention. But he did see that we were doing a very good job, and he might have not worried. Maybe he was in our camp too. We didn't know. We just didn't bring it up. And she's lived there for 3 years now, and there's absolutely, it's no issue. And her air changes were a little over 2, so she wasn't even at the 1. So I didn't feel like this was a haphazard or risky decision. It just kind of emboldened me, but I decided next time I really wanted to go through the proper channels and do it with the recognition of the building department. So, so that's what we did. And now before I go on though, I'm interjecting 4 slides that I robbed from a presentation that I watched a few weeks ago that was put on by EEBA, let's see. And that's the Energy and Environmental Building Alliance. So it's on non-vented attics, and I wanted to, it came along, so I watched it so I could see what other people were thinking. And this presentation was a guy in Georgia, so we're not comparing exactly apples to apples, but I think there's a few things here that are worth noting. And when they're talking about open cell and closed cell, this is just sort of giving you the difference. So that Icynene I used would have been open cell versus the closed cell that is typically used in the Northwest for that 2 inches up against the sheathing. And they're saying they're both equal in this code requirement that's talking about foam. I'm not sure that's true in our area, but also to keep in mind that they're using the foam exclusively, not in combination with fiberglass or rock wool or cellulose. They're just using it. So at any rate, I think that I just want people to note of this, and maybe there'll be some comments at the end. They pointed out that sometimes installation can be a problem. I've seen a lot of good installations around here, but still that's the big wild card. And also, how does it perform over time? Does it develop gaps over time? And then they introduced this new kind of non-vented attic that doesn't use foam that I found a little bit fascinating. I don't agree with it though, but they're doing it. They're not putting a soffit vent in, if I understand it correctly. They're putting a ridge vent in, and they're saying, well, if moist air gets in there and it condenses, then that type of either fiberglass or rock wool, or maybe some other choices, the air will move through it and it will diffuse through the ridge vent. And I'm saying that in our climate zone, the ridge vents are too much of a problem, that they're actually going to cause a problem, not solve it. But nonetheless, I found it interesting that they came up with a whole nother angle of the non-vented roof without foam. So how do you do it? How do you go with no foam? And I'm saying that you just have to start with the design, and then I'm going to show you my steps that I take that go from all the way from the foundation all the way up to the roof. And I'm going to suggest you skip the wafer board and everything in that family. I feel pretty strongly about this because I've seen some pretty gross failures with wafer board when moisture gets to it. And that would be I-joist would be out, these shear wall panels that are made with that product, Paralams. I will use LVLs, glue lams, plywood, and real wood. And you know, plywood doesn't degrade because the way wafer board does, because it's peeled from a log and the wood cells remain much the way a hardwood floor would. As it gets a little bit of dampness, it can adjust by swelling and contracting as it needs to without degrading. So that's why plywood is good. So you want to also get really good at air sealing, and you want to, I believe, let everything breathe to the inside, meaning from the roofing on down, breathes to the inside, from the exterior sheathing in, breathes to the inside, and from the exterior sheathing out, breathes to the outside. So while under construction at Abbott's Alley, I had a conversation with Tony, my building inspector. I explained my discomfort with foam. He agreed, and he said, but I need you to present your case so I don't get in trouble. So I have something in my file. So I did that. I did some internet research. I ran across this wonderful article by Joyce Zebrook. Most of you know him. And when I read through this article, it was like the ICC lifted his logic and language, or his ideas, right out of this paper or this article to justify the requirement for foam. The problem is that the climate zones are different all across the country and the way moisture behaves. So I don't think it's really a good policy to apply one premise to everywhere. And what works in Chicago might not work so well here. So as I read through the article, it was easy for me to see how we mitigate all of the things that he said were problems. So this is some of his language out of that article. I've read about the ice dams, and I've talked to lots of builders from the Northeast and from the Midwest who have to contend with this all the time, and for them it's a big deal. But here, if we're in the Puget Sound region, it's really a non-issue. And then moisture-laden air from the conditioned space is not a problem in the homes that I build. There's several reasons, and one is because we're getting our air changes down, and I'm installing the heat recovery ventilation systems so that they run 24 hours a day. And by doing it that way, you're getting 5 air changes a day, and it's controlling your humidity and keeping it in a bandwidth of 30 to about 60%, which is keeping not only the occupants healthy, but also the building components healthy. So there's up to 6 exhaust ports coming out of all the damp, moist locations, and then 1 at the highest part of the roof where the warm air is going to rise. And then there's another 6 that are supplying fresh air into all the living spaces. So there is no real duct work in our homes other than the heat recovery ventilation tubes that we're using. And they really don't have joints. It's not an opportunity to leak. There's no recessed cans. Sometimes we have some things like fire suppression systems and like in Abbott's Alley, we had to be fully fire sprinklers. So we have a little bit of that stuff going on, but we really try to minimize everything, including try to use wall sconces instead of ceiling lights when possible. And then, yeah, so we only have like 2 ducts, the incoming, outgoing for the heat recovery ventilation system. And that's usually coming in and going out of a wall area. And then, you know, Joe is suggesting that, this is the last slide I have on this article. One of the issues is they thought that a vented attic would keep the roof cooler. He says it hasn't borne out that much. It's like a 10-degree difference, which his premise is that that's sort of insignificant. So again, you can't do this without thinking about the house as a system. You have to go that route because you can't just start adding things here and there. Because I painted this picture for the building official and I laid it out in a nice, clear argument, including those points from Joe's article and that as backup, he approved. So my system mitigates all those reasons, and I'm going to start with some drawings and pictures from our construction process, because it's not just, you're not just thinking about the attic, you got to think about it from the foundation level. So right at the start, I've drawn this red line here. That's our air and moisture barrier. And what we're doing now is we're putting 1.5 inches of foam vertically on the outside that stops about 1.5 inches below the top of the foundation. And then when we build our wall assembly, that sheathing and foam layer, which equals 1.5 inches thick, comes down and meets that foundation foam so that you have a nice place where you're getting rid of any thermal bridging. And then of course we're using 2 layers of 2-inch foam under our slab. So that's isolating that from, you know, and that does a pretty good job of keeping air, you're not getting air coming up from down below. So in addition to that, we're using 1/4 inch sill seal between our foundation and our mud sill. And that frees us up from having to use pressure treated lumber, which is a bonus. And we don't have to use the fancy hot dip galvanized bolts. We can go back to plain bolts. We don't have to use those fancy corrosion resistant nails and other hardware either. So that's our starting point. Here's what that looks like in the real world. What's nice about using 2 layers of foam on the bottom is this project didn't have that, but sometimes you have an interior footing, and when you have that, you can still have the 1 layer and then just cut out the top layer if there's like a need for a pad or something. So this is just a little side note. Building this way without a crawl space, besides making it more accessible for all ages, it also, you can offset some of the costs associated with it by letting it be the finished floor. And this picture is, we got really lucky on this job, and everything that we poured out here happened when it was going down below freezing at night. So this has about 1 foot of straw underneath this black plastic. And this is the natural stain. This background on this slide is the natural stain that occurred from that straw, and that became our finished floor. And you can read this slide as well as I can. So this is where we start with our argument about you know, in our methodology about air sealing. So eliminating thermal bridging is, there's a lot of ways to do it. And on a few jobs, we have done this, where we hang our floor system off the wall and just run the floor plywood over the double plate. This is a really wonderful way to go if you can do it. It doesn't matter if you do it this way or if the joists sit on top of the double plate, no matter what, there's no reason not to let the rim joist be your header. That way you can eliminate, as you can see at the top of the window here, you can eliminate any solid headers over windows, which give you a better ability to insulate and do a better job air sealing. So the foam is right here in this layer. And then of course we're doing a bang up job flashing, and I'm not going into details about how to flash windows. I found that within the industry, there is no consensus on how to flash windows, but I do know that each window manufacturer has a specific set of instructions, and it's important to pay attention to those. And but I will tell you that if you talk to 3 different people about how to flash a window, you're going to get 3 responses. So, but that is an important area to pay attention to. And then, of course, to use only casement, awning, and picture windows, because those are the most airtight windows out there. So then, most people know about the thermal break shear wall now, also known as the Martha wall. This wall assembly, I have not found a reason to build it differently yet. I suspect that someday there will be an alternative to the polyextruded styrene. I do know that the people that manufacture it are improving it from an environmental standpoint all the time. I've even gone to a tour of the factory in Gresham, Oregon, and was there for an hour, and I had 0 reaction to the process, and I'm very chemically sensitive. So I feel good about this. It performs well as a gasket, but also as it builds in resilience with its added seismic performance. And for the framers, it's easy for them to adapt. And no sub that follows the framers has to change their procedure. The cider doesn't have to do anything fancy, different. Electricians, plumbers, everything that follows is the same. And here is a link, and people can look it up themselves, but this is the case study of the testing that was done at Oregon State University by a builder, Ben Walsh, down in Oregon, who commissioned this study back in, I think, 2010. And then it got published 6 years later by NIA. And it's on the Eco Building Guild Code Innovations database, so that if people want to build this way, there's certainly backup. This is an inside view of what a wall might look like, although you're going to see, look at all this air sealing we did. We were just really paranoid. This was on my sister-in-law's house, and now today I wouldn't do this. This is overboard. This is overkill. We've learned some new techniques since then, but we just wanted to make sure to get it right. We didn't want her house to have any issues whatsoever. And you can see the tall energy heel, and you can also see here how the exterior foam goes all the way up, and it actually makes contact with the roof sheathing and the sill seal at the slab. So we're using, on this project, we use Kimberly-Clark. They make the diapers. The technology is the same as their diaper technology. It's similar to Tyvek, but theirs has little bumps on it. And this was the first time I used their product. I'm happy with it. So it's lets moisture out, but doesn't let it in. And you can see the windows. It's hard to see the flashing, but we really did a wonderful job flashing these things. So just a lot of care, making sure that air can't get in. Here's my architect's rendering of our wall system with the foam going up to the roof sheathing. This one shows the foam at the roof, but we didn't, we don't do it. So It also shows the 2 layers of fiberglass that we use. Here's my version. Oh yeah, there's two things I wanted to mention about this. For our trusses, we're also using a continuous rim. And the last couple batches of trusses, the truss designer, engineer, made the top cord bare on that rim. So that eliminated the need to use hangers on the truss. So that was pretty cool. Although, as this picture shows, another way to do it is if the truss designer wants the bottom cord to be the primary support for the truss, you can use a hanger. And this is sort of drawn in as an LVL, which we've done on some jobs. And I usually like to close in my soffits. I'll use a vented soffit there. We always order custom flashings too. We never buy off-the-shelf flashings because they're never adequate. So these are all steps of how to get there and justify not using foam. Here's a better picture of that Energy Heal truss that's exactly the same width all the way up to the top point. And here's an inside wall showing the plywood, and this penetration you see here is our solar feed. So that's one of the few penetrations that we'll have going up there. There's always a few things like the smokies, the ceiling lights, but you really want to try to have almost no penetrations up there going into that attic. And this is what it looks like after we insulate. We're using 2 layers, fiberglass. I like fiberglass. Stagger the joints. And some people have argued with me about it's too much. You shouldn't be using 2 layers. You're wasting your money. But it's not really, in the big scheme of things, it's not a big cost. And I think it's better to fill the cavity up so that you don't get patterns of airflow up there. I just think it's a better situation. So a good HRV system, in my mind, it's high efficiency and it's going to run all the time. And I've already explained that it's going to supply the living rooms and exhaust the other areas. I'm going to show you a few pictures of how we do it. We buy manifolds from Small Planet Supply that are Zender, and we use the Zender Comfo tubes. And we just love this system. And in this case, these 2 pipes here that are in this outside wall, this is going to the outdoors. These are outdoor feeds, and they will be insulated when we put our netting up and blow in our bats. That worked out well for this situation. I'm going to show you another example in a minute, but all these tubes will be soffitted in unless they're in a joist cavity, and each one goes to their own destination. Here's another example of a retrofit 1904 house with the HRV system. And these will not get covered up. These will always be exposed because it's an unfinished attic. It's important to hang the machine so that it doesn't vibrate. And these have a dual core heat exchange. If you're not familiar with them, look at it. That's how you get your highest efficiency. Here's another way to insulate that incoming and outgoing air duct. Since this 1904 had huge gaps everywhere, we ended up using it sprayed in foam as our primary method for insulation because we needed to seal up like big 3/4 inch gaps everywhere. So that's a rare occurrence. And this is what it looks like finished. So the manifolds are behind this wall now, and it's in a place where you can get at it easily, hung from the wall, and it controls the humidity. So the controller is right here. We've learned to keep the controller up high so that people don't fiddle with it. We don't want them to change it. We set it on the second lowest speed. And if the humidity ever gets above like 50 or 60, it automatically kicks into a higher speed. And then when it gets the humidity back down, it goes back to the second speed. So it does the job all by itself. And we don't use override switches in the bathrooms because we found that that was a waste of time. When I was had my home monitored by the Building America guys, we tested them in the higher speed and the lower speed, and there was such a negative, it was such a minimal difference between the higher speed and the lower speed that we decided to keep it simple. We'd get rid of all those extra controllers, and it's been much better since then. So then there's certain heating choices that you got to make. The ductless mini split's a no-brainer because it's a mandate by the code if you're all electric, which we are. And then the infrared cove or ceiling panels work good for those rare days in the winter when it gets too cold for the ductless mini split to keep up. I want to use the Sandem system in the future. I haven't yet, but I've started my research down that road, and that looks like an excellent method to go. But the important thing is no central heat, no serious, unless you're going to keep all the ducts in the heated envelope. But there's just not really a reason to use central heat anymore. And this is what those things look like. One ductless mini split, the compressor outside, cove heater above the windows. And then I've started using on Abbott's Alley and the project before, condensing dryers. And what a game changer that is. So how many people know that when you turn on your dryer, that's like, 350 CFM fans sucking air out of your house? And I hadn't really thought about it too much. So when it was pointed out to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's one more thing to do. But it's a good thing to do. And it's all part of the package of getting your penetrations as close to zero as possible and sealing up that envelope. What I learned about the cook stoves, I quit using gas after the Healthy Home class. Gas, 75% steam, and then all the pollutants would really mandate a hood fan that goes to the outdoors, where we're using these glass top cook stoves, which don't create as much need for filtration. I hardly ever use my hood fan, but when I do, it's recirculating and has a charcoal filter. Now, a lot of people have trouble getting over this, but I'm just telling you, I love to cook. And this is, I've gotten used to the glass top. Induction's great, but a whole price category higher than just the plain glass top. And when I learned that the glass top was 20%, only 20% less efficient than induction, I'm like, this is a no-brainer when we're trying for affordability here. So in summary, make it an all electric airtight home, minimal penetrations, use real wood plywood, and eliminate all your thermal bridging, and use a high efficiency, continuously running HRV system. I guess of all the things that I've mentioned, I feel like that is the nut. That is one of the most important things to be able to justify elimination of the foam. And that's it. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys being of interest in this topic, and I'm hoping that this has generated some questions.
Thank you, Martha. So far, one question from John Alexander about what HRV are you using?
So John, yeah, thanks for asking. I was using a Life Breath. No, I was using Fantech for many years. Fantech was using a aluminum core, and Life Breath used to use a plastic core, and I couldn't wrap my mind around the plastic core, and I had lots of conversations. So what happened is, how is the sound? Is it okay?
Yeah, I'm hearing you okay.
Okay, because I kept hearing a little bit of choppiness coming my way. At any rate, so John, now I'm using a Life Breath with ECM motors. When Life Breath came out with their ECM motors, the energy consumption is half of what it is with the other motors. And and they also switched to aluminum cores. So they removed the obstacle that I had in my brain about using their product. So I'm just really happy with what they have to offer.
Does anybody else have any questions? If so, please add them to the Q&A chat.
Yeah. Awesome.
You were very
great.
thorough, apparently. So I
Yeah.
guess now we can end this presentation and we'll be, oh, whoop, John has another question.
Well, the condensing dryer. So the first time I used a Bosch, and this time they're Blomberg. There aren't a lot of choices of condensing dryers on the market. This is the dilemma. But every year there are more and more out there, and some of them that were out there for a while got pulled. What I did is I first tested out the Blomberg on a house that I have up in Bellingham, and I used it for about a year, and then had success with it. So yeah. So at any rate, it's the Blomberg now.
Martha, are you seeing the more questions that have popped up? We have one from Tom Balderston. Have you done any air quality testing for the range hood? We just got low cost beaters from TempTop.
No, Tom, but I'm happy to be the guinea pig. Always love to be part of the testing. And so if you want to give me some more information on that, I could use it on my own home, but we are like we're running the HRV 24/7, but it still would be interesting to check it out.
So Greg is asking, have you tried heat pump dryers yet? And if so, do you like or not like them?
No, that's what we are using. Some people call them condensing dryers and some people call them heat pump dryers. It's my understanding that either they're exactly the same thing or close enough to be equal. And yes, I do like them. They have a secondary filter that has to be cleaned out about every 6 loads. And so you have to be mindful of that. But other than that, I'm very satisfied with them.
So Terry asks, do you think inspectors in other jurisdictions will be open to unvented attics with that insulation, or do you have any sense about that?
Well, I don't. And I guess I intend to find out. I'm not going to go to different building departments and query them ahead of time, but I have a set of plans in development for Bellingham, so I'm going to be able to find out how Bellingham feels about it pretty soon.
John Alexander is back with why not EPS or polyiso instead of EPX on the outside wall? Seems like EPS has higher global warming potential.
You mean EPX? Yeah. So I've looked into the others, and it's a personal preference, John, and I've also communicated directly with the manufacturers' reps about these products, and my last conversation with them, granted it was a few years ago, but the rep for Owens Corning said, we have probably 1/20th of the environmental impact than what we used to have because we're constantly making improvements to the way we manufacture. So I like the fact that the EXP is it doesn't break apart easily. It's impervious to water pretty much. It's lightweight. Everything about it seems to fit what I'm looking for, but also that was the type of foam that was tested at Oregon State Universities. At least I think that's the type. But so at any rate, it's just my personal preference. It may be that the others would work great for you doing the same thing.
Hey, that happened so suddenly. Sorry, didn't mean to jump in.
Oh, so I said, yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
So we have a question from Tom Barston. Should we do that one first, and then Lucas wanted to jump in too?
Yeah.
Sure.
So Tom is asking if you have a sense of how you like the longer dryer time with the heat pump dryer, because he's heard a lot of people say this is a problem, but he's not sure if they've actually tried it or not.
Well, yeah, it's a problem if you're impatient, but I don't really understand what the problem is. In other words, you just get used to it and you allow for it. And I suppose some people might stack up laundry and say, Saturday is laundry day and I'm going to do a load and a dry and it's going to take the same amount of time. You have to get out of that time frame or that mindset. But I don't find a problem.
It's great for people who are just going to leave the laundry sitting in the dryer anyway. So,
well, and sometimes I'll turn the dryer on and
laundry in my dryer.
Okay, so Martha, if you're okay, Lucas wanted to jump in and have a conversation about foam free.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to clarify a couple things from some research that was done recently by Anthony Pack up at Propriet is his name of his company, but he does a lot of research on embodied carbon and such. And just on the conversation around XPS versus EPS foams, the point of clarification I wanted to make is that XPS on average is roughly 10 to 50 times the carbon impact per cubic foot compared to EPS, based on third-party EPDs provided by the actual manufacturers themselves, right? And like, there's a lot of debate about third-party EPDs and all the details of that, and like, you know, are the numbers totally accurate? No, but let's put like 30-40% error margins on them, like crazy error margins, and the numbers still don't even remotely overlap, right? So like spray foam and XPS insulation are in this whole category of their own of just like insane carbon impact per kilowatt hour. There is a move towards HFO rather than HFC blowing agents in XPS and spray foam, which brings down their impact by 30-40%, but that still has them at like 70 to 100 pounds per cubic foot. Polyiso and EPS are more in the range of like 3 to 10 pounds per cubic foot. So it's a dramatic difference. And the reason it makes so much difference in the Northwest is if we're looking at life cycle carbon impact, we have to think about the context in which we're building high performance and how much carbon is actually saved per kilowatt hour. So Martha, you're kicking ass building in areas outside of Seattle City Light territory because there's a lot more carbon to save per kilowatt hour on the grid in areas outside of Seattle, right? For instance, down here in Tucson, on Tucson Electric Power, we have about 2 pounds of carbon per kilowatt hour. In Seattle City Light, it's about 0.1. So there's 20 times more carbon per kilowatt hour saved here in Tucson than in Seattle. So being really careful about how much carbon we add up front to buildings is so critical. And in the Northwest, it's very, very hard to ever pay back. Well, it's really hard to pay back spray foam or XPS anywhere. And in the Northwest, especially in Seattle, it's hard to pay back even EPS and polyiso. But it makes a tremendous difference if we just get rid of spray foam and XPS in our specifications. It cuts something like 70% of the embodied carbon and insulation load up front at minimum.
So you just offered us another piece of ammunition to give the building official in arguing against using spray foam up in the attic area. I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
It's a huge deal, and foam free is just obviously my passion. As anyone who's talked to me knows. Yeah, and then there's also ways to get around code. We've done a ton of foam-free work in Washington, foam-free roofs, foam-free walls, et cetera, even within code. But basically, you usually have to go with continuous exterior insulation or do an exterior vented roof assembly, which are both more complex details that fit into, high-end passive house projects, but don't necessarily fit into the budgets for projects other than that. So
right, yeah. So the whole market rate housing, which produces most of the housing in the country, the spec builders, those people need tools to be as affordable as possible, or they're never going to come on board. And I look forward to, the hemp discussion yesterday was intriguing for me because I want to have a continuous layer, but I tried adding continuous layers on the outside of the sheathing is a little more problematic, and it raises the cost a lot. And so anyway, so my program works for me right now, and I'm sure every project we keep tweaking it every project. But I feel pretty confident that most building officials could be talked into the no foam up there, because if you can present these arguments to them and the air sealing is really 90% of it.
Yeah, and I just want to deliver a huge compliment. I mean, the way you told your story there is so powerful. The kind of journey into using foam, journey away from using foam, right? Like, I went through the same thing myself. I used hundreds of thousands of square feet of spray foam air sealing attics before I saw it failing tremendously from a health, carbon, blah, 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 all these different issues, moisture management. And I just, that journey you described vibes very much with me. It's why I hate foam so much, is because I ruined some people's lives with it.
Well, and the thing is, have you ever seen a failure like the one that I fear, like where you have a roof leak or a leak from outside and it gets trapped in
similar,
there?
even crazier. So I did all the spray foam right before I left Santa Barbara to move up to Seattle. I was running a home energy retrofit division for a big builder. And I told everyone I was going to go do a blower door test as a 1-year follow-up as part of our responsibility. And I just wanted to collect data, right? I wanted to see what had happened. And I go to houses and people are telling me about their children having allergies they never had before. Oh, but we're comfortable and our bills are lower, but our kids seem to have used. Just like all this weird stuff kept happening, right? So we start looking into foam and researching it, and then we start learning about the moisture failure issues. And anyway, this is leading up to us getting on a roof in Santa Barbara. A year after we installed spray foam. It was spray foam, OSB, comp shingle, so as vapor closed as it gets. This family loved to cook, had teenage daughters that showered a lot, so there's a lot of moisture load in this house. It's in Santa Barbara, where there's a lot of seismic motion and such, and radiant cooling of skies because it's clear at night. And basically, a guy was walking next to me, and I'll imitate it because I'm standing. It goes boom, 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 goes straight through the roof sheathing. That's how much it had rotted out in under a year.
Right, and so they were missing the heat recovery ventilation system, which might have mitigated.
They were missing a lot of things in this project.
Yeah, but I mean that I guess that goes to my point about you can't just do the one thing. You have
and
to
that's
do
the
all.
risk of foam to me, is it's just something that people specify and they're like, oh, it'll take care of everything and we're good. And then not thinking about the consequences from a social justice standpoint, exposing people to toxicity from a carbon standpoint, all these other things, right? So, I mean, that's what my whole presentation next week's about, not foam, but about not using less bad materials and just demanding good materials to be used. But what you're talking about with your journey, again, is just, it's really powerful to express it that way.
Well, and the sad part is the attitude of that not using the foam is a greater liability from an insurance standpoint than not using it is greater liability than using it. And
it's so crazy because it's like
it has to get changed, and I'm not that's not my job to change that, except to educate as much as I can about it. And anyway,
completely, it's you couldn't say it better. I don't know how to change the code either, but it's just nuts. It's such a extractive capitalism thing that we've let code somehow become telling us to do the highest carbon, most risky, highest toxicity thing for unvented roofs, which are great for many reasons. Like I love unvented roofs. Just the way that code tells you to do them, 3 out of 4 ways are basically foam. And it's just sad because we can do so much better.
It kind of goes back to, Martha, your original experience with the Visqueen. Like, we always have to be battling these things that seem like they're.
Thanks for
yes,
in.
I want to get back to you totally, so I'm going to jump off, but I just want to say thank you again so much.
And I think we're done. I think that we've known everybody's conversation. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, there are two more comments in the Q&A. One is Tom Alderson says, if you use SPF blown foam, you should spec it with Honeywell Solstice blowing agent. And then, John Alexander and Christina Stimson just want to say you had a marvelous presentation and they learned so much. So at this point, we're going to end this presentation and head back to the Remo tables where you'll be able to chat with each other in person. And Martha, are you able to stay around and chat?
We'll stick around.
Okay,
yeah.
great. Then I'll see you guys at the tables.
Thank you, Kathy.